To record. Hi, we are so happy to have Christine Coleman Nunez here presenting this session called Language Learners Self-Assessment of Interpersonal Communication Skills from Perception to Reality at PSMLA's first ever virtual conference. My name is Jennifer Campbell, and I will be hosting today along with Karen Belcastro. This session is being recorded. If you're tweeting or posting on social media, we welcome you to include @PSMLA1 and hashtag PSMLA21 so we can see and you can share all of your thoughts. For attendance purposes, please be sure that your displayed name matches the name used to register for the conference. If you are unsure how to do so, you can send me a message in the chat and I will be happy to provide you with instructions. Please welcome me in welcoming, please join me in welcoming Christine Coleman Nunez to PSMLA. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. And it's nice to see some familiar faces. I know it's late in the day and you've all had a long day, so I appreciate you being here for this discussion. I would love to see everybody in person, but one great thing about Zoom conferences is the chat feature, because it allows us to have sidebar conversations without stopping the flow of the presentation. So I encourage you to use that feature if there's something you want to put out there for the group. I won't be able to monitor the chat during the presentation, but anything that comes up that we need to discuss at the end, we can do that. So please feel free to put your thoughts out there as we go along. We're going to be talking today about interpersonal communication skills, specifically listening and speaking, and how learners perceive their own skills compared to a more objective, ACTFL measure of their performance. So we'll start by looking at the ACTFL major levels of speaking proficiency: novice, intermediate, and advanced. I know you're familiar with these, but I just want to review some of the key features. This is sort of a condensed look at the levels. So we know the novice level. We'll call this speaker the parrot. And a speaker at this level could respond to a prompt like, tell me the things you like to do, by saying, read, watch TV, I play football. Okay, this is a response to a simple question using highly practiced words, phrases, maybe occasional sentences, and it answers the question but does not provide much information. The intermediate level speaker, who we'll call the linguistic survivor, can do more with the language, obviously, and to get them to do more, we'd need to have a bit of a more purposeful prompt to elicit this level speech. So we might ask the speaker, for example, to describe the things they like to do, so they can provide a response that goes beyond a list. So the survivor might respond with, I study English at the university. I like to read a lot. My favorite author is J.K. Rowling, and I play on the football team. I walk my dog in the park after school. He's creating more personal meaning with strings of sentences beyond words and phrases, and provides the listener sort of a snapshot, as opposed to the advanced speaker, who we'll call the storyteller, because they can provide enough detail for the listener to get a picture beyond a snapshot. So to elicit speech at this level, we might ask someone to describe in detail their typical day, or compare their day to day with a typical day. So we elicit some major time frames, and the student might say, well, I'm a student at the university and I'm a science major, so my schedule's pretty busy with classes and labs, and I don't usually get home till around 6. Then I take my dog for a walk in the park and eat dinner and do my homework. But today we had a snow day, so I got caught up on my homework. Okay, the storyteller is able to describe their daily routine in more detail using paragraph length description that has a beginning and an end, and a variety of time frames, to really provide the listener a more complete picture of a typical day. So keeping in mind that ACTFL defines proficiency in part as the ability to communicate meaningful information in a spontaneous interaction. So real world communication. I'd like you to take a few moments to reflect on how classroom learning translates to the real world. So we're gonna take about 3-4 minutes maybe to discuss in groups some questions that will contextualize our conversation. When we come back together, I'm going to move on with the presentation, but keep your thoughts in mind, anything that comes up that you want to revisit in the discussion, or again, feel free to make use of the chat feature to continue adding your thoughts. So the first question is, what kinds of feedback, and this may be direct or indirect feedback, do students receive about their speaking proficiency, and from whom? So essentially, how do students translate what they can do in the classroom to what they would be able to do in real world speaking tasks? How do they know that? And maybe a related but maybe more difficult question is, how do they know what they can't do? Where would they get stuck in a real world situation? So these two questions refer to how students know what they can do, but the last question relates to how we know what they can do. So for example, how do we know where our students in German 3 should be on that continuum of performance toward oral proficiency? Do we know if they should be parrots or survivors or storytellers? Do we set those benchmarks for the different curricular levels? And if we do, what criteria do we use to do that? So in groups of maybe 3 or 4, I'd like you to think about those things, and then when we come back together, we'll see how that relates to the rest of our discussion today. So am I doing the groups?
No, just give me just a second and I will put us into groups.
Now, we're going to lose your questions, when we go into
You're
breakout.
going to lose it. So it's essentially the feedback that learners get about their proficiency and how we set benchmarks.
How do they know how do they know what they cannot do?
How do they know what they can do? How do they know what they can't do? And
realistic benchmarks. Okay.
how do we know? Yeah.
Okay, I got the questions for my group.
So yeah, we recommend you could also take like a snip on your computer of the questions if you'd like, so that you can see them.
Or my students have showed me that you can also use your phone.
Hey, great idea.
Yeah, didn't mean to turn that flashlight on, but
Yeah. Okay, so the breakout rooms are ready and I'm going to open them all right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please do not include me. I am Eduardo.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah.
you're fine.
Someone is inviting me. So.
No, just say not now. I'm sorry, I meant to mention before we got started that my husband is zooming in. I didn't think that would be a problem. I need him to give me some feedback and potentially help me with some things. So that's why you see a name that's not a conference person.
Okay. No problem.
It's 5:55. Usually the breakout rooms, they get I think if I close this, I won't close the rooms. Yeah. They get a minute warning, 60-second warning. So we'll bring them, we'll close them like a minute early.
Okay, so at what time would you like me to close it?
So
Like 5:58?
Yeah,
Okay,
I have 5:56 on my,
me too, on my laptop, so.
I was gonna go around to the rooms, but I feel like whenever I did that when I was teaching online, everybody stopped talking as soon as I went in the
Yeah.
room. So I really don't want to interrupt the flow of their discussions.
Sure. So what do you teach at Kutztown?
Spanish.
Well, I kind of assumed that you just gave German as an example. So I was like, well, I'm not going to assume just because her her married name is Nunez that she
No,
teaches Spanish, but that's all.
well, because everything else is in Spanish. I mean, I have translations in English and stuff, and I thought, well, let me throw a German example. out
No,
there.
I
So the
like
German
that.
teachers don't feel like we're not including them.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That would be me.
Okay.
And Spanish. Well, I do both. So
Oh, good.
will you be doing this again, or is this the only breakout room?
This is the only breakout room.
All right, that's fine. I was just wondering if I was anticipating making other ones. So
Nope. This is
okay,
it.
cool.
And you can probably bring them back now.
Okay.
Actually. Yeah. Even though I'm co-host, I don't see the breakout room. Oh, maybe it's down here.
It doesn't look like anyone's back.
They
Except for Eduardo.
yeah,
I mean, so it looks like they're all still talking. So they
yeah,
yeah,
it's gonna
okay.
be bumping them back in
Yeah.
minutes. Yep.
Recording
A forced exit.
Right in the middle, right in the middle of it.
Okay, well, as I said, feel free to continue throwing things into the chat if you're still brainstorming. But the questions that you just were pondering were the same ones that we thought of at Kutztown, and they formed the basis for our instructional model that we developed for 5th semester conversation. The goal of our curricular model is to provide more real life feedback to learners beyond the structured classroom activities, and to teach them to assess their own abilities in those real life situations so they can see where they have gaps and give them strategies for improvement. The program also helps us define realistic benchmarks for this level course so we can then align learning activities with those benchmarks. So we have two major components of the program. The first one is the authentic interpersonal communication opportunities. Students complete a total of 25 half-hour conversations with both Kutztown University peers who are native and heritage learners. We call this program Language Partners. And they engage with partners across the Spanish-speaking world through a program called Talk Abroad. In both cases, the sessions are dedicated solely to conversation in the target language. It's not tutoring or anything like that. It's just conversation. And just leaving aside the details of the programs for now, I will just mention one major difference, which is that Talk Abroad sessions are done through video conferencing and they're recorded. So students can go back and listen to their conversations afterwards when the pressure is off and to assess their performance, and instructors can listen and give students feedback as well. So that's a nice feature. And I know there are other programs out there, a growing list of other programs. I've heard of some at this conference and a conference I attended last week. Two that I keep hearing about are Boomerang and Lingua Meeting. I don't know anything about them, but I put this question out there as something you can potentially might want to just put out there in the chat. If you have used other programs that are these kinds of, you know, video conferencing programs, feel free to, you know, throw those out there and share with everyone. But Talk Abroad is what we use in addition to our in-house program language partners. We also measure progress at the beginning and end of the semester using the AAPPL. So that's an official ACTFL rating. It's objective and third-party rating. So we're not, you know, measuring our own students. The AAPPL test measures performance towards proficiency from novice to advanced low levels. So it doesn't, we don't see progress within the advanced level. We just can see if the students made it to advanced. So it provides important feedback, both for the learners and for us. It provides important data for our program. So two of the important program outcomes, the first one is setting program benchmarks. And I throw this question out there for you to potentially put in the chat or think about. I'd be interested to know what you think. Where fifth semester second language learners should be on this continuum. And you don't have to think about sub-levels. You could maybe just think about major levels. Do you think they should be novice, intermediate, or advanced? And if there aren't many guesses?
At the beginning or the end?
At the end.
At the end, okay.
Okay, I see a lot of intermediates. I was going to say, if there aren't many guesses, it's part of the problem because we really oftentimes don't know what level of speaking proficiency is realistic at different levels of the curriculum. But I do see a lot of intermediates, and that's pretty spot on for what we've seen over 4 years. This is data collected from 94 participants over 4 years. And these are the post-test scores broken down by sub-levels. We can see the majority of students, I'm sorry, Nancy, US pre or post, and these are post-test scores. Okay, this is at the end of the semester. So the majority come in at intermediate mid with, you know, a number of students going beyond that level. I think the important thing to note is that very few students, these are percentages, so maybe 4% of the students by the end of the semester have not really made it out of the novice level. And this is the same data, but with the categories collapsed. So below intermediate mid is the red bar, and intermediate mid or above is clearly, you know, a reasonable, realistic target for us, for our learners at that level, with 80% of the students consistently coming in at that level. So this is important information. The other important outcome of the AAPPL testing is that we can clearly demonstrate program effectiveness, which is great data to have when you need to defend your programs to administrators. Not that we ever have to do that, but it's good to have just in case. The blue bar indicates increase from pre-test to post-test, and we can see that students who started below intermediate mid, 90+% of them do show up an increase on their post-test. We don't expect as much increase as we go up the levels, and of course, since we can't see progress at the advanced level because the AAPPL doesn't test that high, you know, we don't know what's happening at that level. So we've been able to assess learner progress and set the benchmarks through AAPPL testing, but the other important aspect of the program was to help learners assess their own performance toward proficiency. So we created this self-assessment rubric. The learners in this class have the authentic conversation sessions to use as a basis for their assessments, but you could use a rubric like this in any class with any activities. I will say this is a very basic rubric. Just has this is the template is the red bar at the top. So students are just to list whatever communicative tasks they felt they want to comment on during their sessions, whether they could do it easily, needed prompting, or could not do it. I keep this rubric simple because I don't want the conversations to feel like a test and have students overly focused on, you know, how's my pronunciation and is my grammar correct? And did I describe using details? And did I connect my sentences into paragraphs? Right? I just want them to have a good time and have a nice conversation, but I do want them to think afterwards, you know, how did it go? Was I able to do these things? And we find that students more often than not check this box. Yep, could do this easily. Of course, they're not indicating how they did the task. So the student says she talked about her major. Well, did she list her major and classes, or did she describe her major and classes, or did she say why her major is important and how it's going to help her in her future? You know, those are very, very different things. So it's a simple rubric that students generally fill out in very simple ways, but at least it gets them focusing on what they did. So I wanted to see, get a better idea if students really felt like they could easily do these things that they say they can do. So created a post-semester survey to see if they had a more realistic understanding of their abilities. And the first part of the survey really was very much like the rubrics. I just pulled can-do statements, ACTFL can-do statements, 2 of each level that the ACTFL tests. The students were to check all that apply, and they did not see these labels of the levels. These are there for you to see the corresponding levels. So they just saw the statements, and I said, check all the things that you can do. And the results were not at all surprising. When I matched the individual students, their rating on their AAPPL posttest to the can-do statements they checked off. Similar to the rubrics, 82% of the students chose can-do statements, indicated they could do things that the AAPPL posttest did not, the AAPPL posttest did not put them at a level to be able to do that. So again, not surprising. There's some reasons for this. One of them is that the students are speaking with partners who are not only highly sympathetic listeners like us, but they are partners who are essentially paid to make sure that the students have a successful half-hour conversation, right? So they make them feel like they can do things. They don't make them feel like they're not successful, and we don't want them to. There are some other reasons, some other explanations that come from the research. There's quite a bit of research that's been done on using can-do statements to measure self-assessment, but I just chose 2 here. Speakers, particularly at the intermediate level, may not be able to distinguish completing a task with minimal effectiveness versus effectively and consistently. So if they got through it, they said, yep, I can do that. The other thing is that students oftentimes haven't had the experience doing the things on the can-do statements, right? So they've had a lot of experiences in their talk abroad and language partner sessions doing lots of other things. So based on that, they sort of project and say, well, I could do this, 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 and this. So yeah, I think I can do that too. The second part of the survey actually was where we got more insights into how students were able to assess their performance overall, not just I can do this, but how do I do it? What are the features of my speaking performance? And again, this they were matched to the different levels that the AAPPL tests, but these are more global descriptions of abilities at the different levels. These are pulled from ACTFL as well, but condensed. And when we look now at the AAPPL post test and the comparison with those statements, we see a very different picture. So in this case, very few students exceeded the AAPPL score. In other words, the description they picked was not higher than, did not correspond to a higher level than the AAPPL score that they received. It surprised me that 41% of the students actually chose descriptions of their abilities below the AAPPL. On this part of the survey, they were only to choose one statement. I don't know if I said that or not, but they didn't choose all that apply. Like with the Cando statements, they just picked the one that best described them. So this is just looking at those two charts we just saw, but side by side to make it a little more clear. Students over assessing their abilities on the based on the Cando statements, but not on the global statements. And so this survey, the results of the survey tell me that while students might over assess what they can do, they do recognize the limitations of how consistently or effectively they can do them. So I think this is good news because it means they are developing confidence in their skills, but at the same time, they're realistic and understand areas they need to focus on. So I would like to share a couple of examples. Let's see, we're done at 6:30, so we'll listen to some of these just so I can leave enough time for discussion. I'd like you to, as you're listening, think about that rubric and put into the chat whether you think this student's rubric should indicate that he could do this easily with prompting or he could not do it. Okay, so we'll listen to a little bit of Sam. Now I might have to share sound here. Let's see. Let me know if you can.
Entonces, te vi mirar Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
These are the translations.
Sí, es.
Y también.
Es de mis programas favoritos. ¿Y tú?
Sí, es muy entretenido.
Sí. ¿Cuál es tu personaje favorito?
Rosa.
O sea, sí. A mí
Es divertido. Es muy divertido.
sí. A mí me gusta mucho Charles.
Sí.
Es-
¿Por qué?
No sé, siento que es muy
Diferente.
es muy inocente, entonces siempre le pasan cosas muy chistosas. Entonces, por eso
Es diferente y no sé.
no te preocupes, ¿Y tienes, te gustan otros programas? ¿Tienes otros programas favoritos?
Yo veo los deportes mucho, pero el espectáculo MacGyver y All American, o todos americanos.
Sí, es similar. A mí me gusta ver deportes también. Me gusta el baloncesto y el fútbol, soccer. Pero actualmente veo otros programas como Rick and Morty o The Good Place Me gusta ver mucho como comedias en televisión.
Um, mm, mm, ¿Qué estudias?
Yo estudio marketing.
Okay, in the interest of time, we'll stop here. Wanted to get through the espectaculo, for those of you that speak Spanish. That was a little humorous. And so I see a couple responses, some with prompting, some not at all.
So,
Oops, sorry, didn't
ento-
mean to do that. Let's just sort of pick this apart a little bit. You know, we see that Sam answers in one-word descriptions of what he likes about the character. He can't add any further description about the other character either. And he kind of maxes out on talking about television because 4 minutes before this, during this session, they had already gone through what do you study, but he ran out of things he could say about TV. So he went back to, I know how to say, what do you study? In some cases, the partners, you know, not because they're ACTFL trained or anything, but it just organically, they elicit higher functions and text types. But, you know, this student could not respond to a question like, what do you like most about your field? So he talks about his brother lives in Nashville because it's somehow related to his career. And this is Sam's assessment. He says he could easily talk about work and school life, and they watched the same show and he could talk about it, but you know, he really didn't talk about the show at all. He used a couple adjectives to describe the characters. So, you know, this is an example of an over-assessment. Again, I want to leave you time for discussion, so I won't play the recording of Sam talking about his family, but just, you know, it's the same type of speech. And you can see the rough translation here. So, you know, does this sound to you like the parrot, survivor, or storyteller level? Or, you know, we could use ACTFL terms. Novice, would we call Sam novice, intermediate, or advanced? Sam's rating was novice high, and we know that high ratings indicate emerging skills at the next level. So maybe he's coming out of parrot stage into survivor stage, maybe not quite there yet. Okay. So, but this is his rubric describing, you know, how he talks about his family. As you noticed, he mentioned family. Yes, he speaks in sentences, but really very highly practiced, rehearsed kinds of things, where they live. He names the family relationships. He does not explain nor go into depth about his family, but in his mind, that's what he did. He explained his family in depth, and he said he had a good conversation about holidays. I can tell you that he said he goes to church at Christmas and eats a lot at Thanksgiving. Okay. So this is a novice level speaker, you know, moving into intermediate. So I want to compare Sally to Sam, and Sally's talking about stereotypes. And so same thing, put in the chat whether you think she could do this easily with prompting or not at all.
Y no sé qué más. ¿Tú tienes estereotipos sobre España?
No creo que son like estereotipos, bueno, son estereotipos, pero tenemos más para like México y like Puerto Rico y eso, pero muchas veces en mis clases de español dice que hispanos solo comen like paella y esas comidas like típicas, pero like hay más comida, lo sé, pero
Sí, no,
yeah.
pero es muy gracioso escucharlo.
Y Bueno, pues para la gente que habla en español aquí, muchas veces gente que no habla en español piensan que ellos, like, los mexicanos o esa gente está hablando cosas de ti o like de la otra persona, like, oh, ¿por qué no está hablando inglés? Está hablando sobre mí. No es así, like, es solo es que no puede hablar inglés. Pero sí, y que no conducen muy bien.
Okay, so we'll stop here. She goes on to talk about, you know, stereotypes about playing loud music and things like that. Sally can do this easily with prompting or not at all. I think we can agree that this particular topic, which the partner asked, do you have stereotypes? She asked specifically about Spain and Sally talked about other countries, but you know, she recognizes she could talk about the stereotypes pretty easily, but she does recognize that when the conversation requires features of higher level speech, like supporting opinions, the negative effects of stereotypes, or more abstract topics like social issues, she needs prompting. Okay, so this is an example of a more realistic kind of self-assessment. So I'm going to stop here because I have to, and I'll leave you with a few thoughts and a question. So I would say that the AAPPL testing certainly helped us determine interpersonal communication benchmarks for the curriculum. We know what students should be able to do and what they can do at this level in their 5th semester, let's say. And the authentic experiences that they had in the target language, combined with the self-assessment, I think helped them develop a more realistic understanding of their overall proficiency. We can use the can-do statements in limited fashion, as an ACTFL also describes, using them as a starting point for self-assessment. But we want to also guide learners to think about features of performance beyond content of the task. I mean, I've seen a lot of more involved rubrics and some that we might use as teachers. And perhaps what we need to do is at the end of the semester, give them a more comprehensive rubric to say, you know, how about all of these aspects of your speaking? But I don't want them to have to do that each time they are in a conversation and put that pressure on them. So I would love to hear how you implement student self-assessment in your classes, or anything you talked about in your group reflections, or anything at all that you want to talk about in the 6 whole minutes that we have left. I think I'll stop sharing so I can see you all.
Hi, Chris.
Hi,
I had
Rachel.
a question, if I may.
You may, please do.
Is it a fair statement to say that the more advanced the student's speaking ability, the more self-aware they are? Like, could we say that the two go hand in hand? Because the last example you gave of the student who's speaking, she's definitely more proficient. Sorry, I just realized my camera was off. She self-assessed more realistically as opposed to the novice student who thought himself more capable. So
there is what I've seen in the research is that novice and advanced students, Sam is an exception here, but that novice and advanced students are better at self-assessment than intermediate. Advanced because they've had more experiences, you know, and they kind of have a better sense of what they can do and what's realistic. Novice because they know what they can't do. But intermediates are kind of in the middle there, where they might not be able to judge as well how they could perform doing things that they haven't ever had to perform.
Right.
That's what I've seen in the research. I don't, it doesn't seem to go up as you go up.
Mhm,
Seems to be kind of go like a U-shaped curve.
mhm. Could there
Which
also
kind of
be
makes
an
sense.
issue? Could it also be an issue with the students, those can-do statements, the global statements? Is it possible that students really don't fully comprehend what those statements mean?
Yes, it's very possible. And, I didn't have time, but I prepared a slide and I don't want to take the time to show it to you now, but there's a lot of things you can pull out of those and a lot of overlap, and subtle things like the word explain, right? They may not be focusing in on that. It says, I can explain this. They're just thinking, like Sam thought he could talk about his family in depth or explain his family, and he didn't explain. So, and the other thing is, what I should do next time, I think, is give them choices on a Likert scale instead of a binary, I can do this or not. So I can do this really well. I can do this with some prompting. I need a lot of prompting. That might give them, that might give us more realistic answers because they only had the choice of, yes, I can do it or I can't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything that came out of your groups? You're mute, Nancy. I see your hands moving, and your lips moving, but I don't hear any sound coming out.
Matt, could you share your rubrics with us? He showed us some really nice rubrics.
Yes, please do.
All right, so this is the writing rubric. For whatever reason, the speaking one is not on my Chromebook that I'm using, but oh no. Hold on, let me do that again. Here. So this is the holistic rubric that we use. We kind of stole this from Howard County Public Schools in Kentucky, I believe, but we framed this for each grade band, pre-novice, novice low, novice mid, novice high, etc. And we changed it slightly for each level. This is the level 3 rubric for writing, but we frame it so that each one is I can, that the teacher would go and circle, and on the back provide evidence in either the writing or the speaking of, the student being able to do it. And kind of afterwards, when time allows, we allow for a conversation of, this is what we as your teacher thought you could do. Do you think it's an accurate reflection of what you're able to do? And I'm willing to share this with anyone who would like it.
I would like it.
Okay.
I hate to be picky, but there's
Yes,
there's a spelling error in novice low. It says Navi low.
Yes, there is.
Just happened to stand out at me, but that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, that really is what we need. I think at the end of this course is to give something much more comprehensive like this, not for every conversation, but
No.
at the end. Now, do students use that, Matt, for self-assessment, or is this I forget if you said it was a teacher assessment?
This is for a teacher assessment. I'm going to put my email.
And then the students say whether they agreed.
Yeah,
with the assessment.
I put my email in the chat. If anyone would just want to shoot me an email, I'll send it out later. That'll
Okay.
be easy that way.
Or if it's a Google Doc and you want to post the link in the chat, or maybe you don't feel comfortable.
I can't because it's in our school.
Sure, no
so,
worries.
yeah, so I gotta go individual, if only.
And if I can add one thing here, I'm biased because Chris is on sabbatical and I'm teaching this course right now. But for me, the fact that we are flooding them with authentic conversation with real people, they can choose topics. I just think it's amazing. And I tell them all the time how lucky they are that we pay for this, and they're really getting a great flood of authentic conversation. And that's what we need to do. If you can do it, do it. That's the tough part.
Have folks used the other, like Boomerang Sherry Garrett talked about that in her session. Or Lingua Meeting. I mean, they're not free. You have to have some resources to pay for these, unfortunately. But there are grants out there and, you know, ways to get money, and maybe you could do it as a pilot.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much. The only question we had in the chat is if you were willing to share your presentation.
Yes, but I think, is someone collecting those and gonna send them? I remember getting an
Oh,
email
perhaps.
that said, okay, so I don't know how that's gonna work, but I can
Yep.
send it to where we're supposed to send it to. And then I guess it goes out to all the participants.
Yes, I believe so. So thank you.
I will
And on
absolutely do
behalf
that.
of PSMLA, we want to thank everyone for attending this session with Christine Coleman Nunez. We welcome and encourage your feedback on our sessions. Please use the link in the PDF program or found in the chat to give the session some feedback. And the recording of the session will also be available to conference registrants after the event. As a reminder for teachers in Pennsylvania, in order to qualify for this session for Act 48 credit, you must complete the Act 48 reflection form. You can find the Act 48 form linked in the PDF program or in the chat. These forms should be completed within 72 hours of this session. Thank you and enjoy the rest of our virtual conference.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.